I think there are a lot of people who viewed Ed Koch through the lens of everyday life in New York at the time, through the issues they cared about, whether it was labor or race relations or the media relations, those sorts of things. And I think then you take a step back 20 years later, you look at it, and I think the larger truths are the things you remember more. Did he really love New York? Did he care about New York? Was he honest?
In 1975, New York came to the brink of bankruptcy. In 1977, there was a blackout and there was looting and lawlessness in certain parts of the city. There was a sense that the city was out of control. And a lot of people forget that, but that's how it felt then.
You've got the Son of Sam killer stalking young people in kind of lovers' lanes. You've got rising crime, poor schools. You've got a lot of people leaving the city. And I think it was an important time. It was a test of whether urban areas could survive.
The mayor was Abe Beame, who was a very quiet, unexciting man who came out really of the old clubhouse system, and he had no charisma at all. And then came Ed Koch.
Don't I have a right to disagree with him?
Well, I'd like to know...
Did I lose my First Amendment rights because I became the mayor?
The difference between you and I is if I disagree with someone, it does not go into the papers.
So what?
It's not heard by thousands of people.
So what? I solemnly swear.
I solemnly swear.
I shall rush to the polls.
I shall rush to the polls.
To re-elect Ed Koch.
Ed Koch takes office in January of '78, and very quickly he began to establish a style that set him apart from previous mayors and really from who we all thought he was anyway.
During the famous transit strike of 1980, he was there famously or infamously leading people across the Brooklyn Bridge and cheering them when they came to the city side and saying, "Keep it going, keep it going."
New York mayors particularly had always been very careful to curry the best relationships they could, cultivate the best relationships they could with labor unions. And the fact that Ed Koch was willing to say, you know, come on, walk across the Brooklyn Bridge, we're not going to let the strike bring the city to a halt, was a change in the sort of power dynamics of city politics.
Our final speaker is Victor Gottbaum, who was for more than 20 years the executive director of New York's District Council 37, the largest urban labor union in the United States. Tell us about those years, including the 1980 transit strike, and how you assess Ed Koch's labor record.
This is really oxymoronic. For me to be up here praising Ed Koch, I can't believe it. I really can't believe it. At the beginning, I didn't dislike Ed Koch. I despised him. Ed Koch was a piece of the city. You couldn't divorce it. This is where he lived. This is what he loved. And because of this, I could negotiate with him, get angry at him, do all kinds of things. But I knew he would never knowingly hurt the city that he loved so much. Thank you.
I think historically you have to say that both education and crime were not the high water marks of the Koch administration. They were things that were left to be done by later mayors. But what he did was significant, and the most pressing problems he faced at the times, and that was the budget.
The fiscal crisis came about in large part because starting under Wagner and then expanding rapidly under Lindsay, the capital budget monies had been used to pay for current events. That's like getting a mortgage and using it to pay for your new TV and your new PC and your new motorcycle.
He has to say no to things such as a hospital in Harlem called Sydenham Hospital, which is an explosive issue very early in his tenure. His budget director, as he recalls now, says, look, we can save $9 million by closing Sydenham Hospital and replacing it with some clinics, because the hospital itself is not a good hospital. As Koch himself tells the story, the emergency room was on the second floor. But in Harlem, it had great symbolic significance. His relationship with minority New Yorkers was always a problem for him.
So it was on April 4th, 78, which was the anniversary of the assassination of Martin Luther King, 14 years at that time, that we arranged a meeting with the mayor. And we said to him we wanted him to demand to the federal government that they replace the cut in summer jobs to youth that summer. And Ed Koch, unlike many, and I heard Pete say he was a traditional liberal, but unlike many liberals at the time, looked at me and said, no, and I'll tell you why. I said, well, if you don't, we're not leaving your office. He says, oh, you're leaving. But before you leave, let me explain to you why your approach is wrong. So after he lectured us on how the federal government had fiscal problems, the city had fiscal problems, and of course he would want every young person in New York working, it was unrealistic, and that our approach was not the best approach to get him to do it, he then asked the police to come in and remove us. And some 20-some years later at my birthday, he reminded me, no one ever heard of Al Sharpton until he had me escorted out of City Hall. At the end of the day, we probably would have liked him better in the 70s and 80s if he told us what we wanted to hear. But it would have meant he didn't respect us enough to talk to us like adults and tell us what, in fact, he was and wasn't going to do. And I think that part of the thing that was the most refreshing and the most appalling about Ed Koch is that he will stand for what he believes in.
It's all part of being mayor. The secret is to enjoy it.
Ed Koch was the media mayor. He was everywhere. He was always in your face. He had an opinion on everything, from the world politics to what was the best hot dog, what was his favorite color.
Reporters would come in and say, oh, Mr. Mayor, you know, yesterday in Jerusalem, so-and-so said such and such, and the mayor would give one of his foreign policy pronouncements. Or somebody would say, oh, Mr. Mayor, you know, the Yankees are going to be in the World Series. What do you have to say about that? There was one radio reporter in particular, whom I won't name, who was so persistent that he developed a new technique, which was essentially to stake out the men's room on the west end of City Hall, outside the bathroom, not inside it, thankfully, and ask him to answer a couple of questions. And the mayor was happy to do this.
In 1982, he makes a giant mistake. He runs for governor. And you could see his heart is never quite in it. He runs a lousy campaign. And the biggest example of that is he gives an interview to Playboy magazine.
From the moment the Playboy interview came out, he was finished. What he said was that living in the suburbs is a joke, that they're sterile, that people ride around in pickup trucks and go to Sears to buy gingham dresses. I mean, he had this stereotypic view of people who lived outside of the big city.
In many ways, the media was his doing, and in many ways, it was his undoing. He liked the limelight too much, I think, for his own good. He often stepped on the substantive accomplishments of his administration. He was overexposed. 12 years is a long time. He was on television all the time, and he could be quite amusing, but I think over 12 years, you'd say, all right, next.
New York City had enormous problems when Ed Koch took over, and New York City will always have enormous problems, and of course he didn't solve all of them. But I think that for a long time, until the troubles of his third term, he gave a lot of the people in the city a sense that maybe some of the problems were solvable.
When I was doing an interview with Senator Moynihan in 1984, he made a comment that has stuck with me and really was a kind of guiding principle, I think, both in the exhibit and the book, and it is that Ed Koch gave New York City back its morale. And I think that's a very important concept when you look at what was going on in New York, and we were lucky to have him when we had him.